Hello. Today, I'm very
Hi.
happy. Hi, here's Philippe Bourgau, hailing from Paris, France. Thank you very much, Philippe. I know it's late
Yeah, thanks a lot.
for you in the day, and I'm really thrilled to have you join us today. Philippe has a very good blog where he's actually uh, posting a lot of quality content, mostly, extreme programming, coaching, but also refactoring organizations and looking into the future. Philippe today can probably tell us a few things that he thinks are coming our way, which I think are really interesting concepts. So over to you, Philippe. Please let us see your vision.
Yeah. So I think I'll go maybe over to two things. What I could think the future, where I think the future might be leading us, and also where I would like to nudge the future around me. And So if we start with where I see the future leading us, what I see currently is that there are a lot of large companies performing quite well. They're relying on data, a lot of scientific management and things like that. I don't know exactly what's the place of human in these organizations. Maybe I'm a bit negative about these, but I don't know. It looks to me they're like extraordinarily complicated and well-tuned machines that work quite well, and they perform well in the market. So I would think that this model is going to spread in more organizations. It what I think of these is that if you think of, for example, lean management, where that relies a lot on data, on what is actually happening, to be able to take informed decisions. It can also be misused in some ways. So if you give the data to people to empower the people so that they can take their own decisions, then you get really agile organizations with mini teams able to take decisions quickly, and people with more kind of skin in the game in what they're doing. But you can also use all this data to take centralized decisions and just push the machine harder. So I think that's one of the challenges of this way of working. In all these companies using all these data, there must be some that are on the first model, and there must be others on the second level. And I also think that a lot of organizations who are going to try to copy this model will fall in the second. So that's a risk for us. If we can try to be aware of that and nudge the situation around us in the second, sorry, I forgot the first direction. Yeah, that would be better. Alex, if you're any question at any moment, don't hesitate.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you make, and we've been seeing recently some pushback on those things. One is this kind of a late stage capitalism, which squeezes the last drop out of everyone, and like to say wants to maximize the surveillance capitalism, so-called surveillance capitalism, where you don't have, even when you purchase something, you don't really own it, because with the IoT and all these things, if the manufacturer detects that you're doing something that they don't like, they can just remotely disable it. All of a sudden, you cannot use your printer, you cannot open your garage door, you cannot go into your car. So you don't really own things because they're centrally managed by the overlords, right? And there's a large sentiment here in North America moving towards the right to repair, where if you buy something and it's a little defect and it's easy to fix, but no, you have to pay $400 or $500 for an expert to come in and just push the button, and you're kind of you feel exploited as a consumer. So that's one negative sentiment towards this age of the machines where they are completely overruling our lives. Another one is the ethical part, where if you found a business on machine learning and is doing a lot of automation for you, and train the machines, and they have these complex neural networks that are guiding their decision making, and if something goes wrong, somebody gets hurt or killed, then in the court of the law, the company can say, well, I don't know, it's the machine, it had nothing to do with us. And that is an ethical dilemma, because you have built that, and you should be morally responsible for the effects of your service. And it's fully automated, and like you say, driven by petabytes of data, and nobody can actually understand how did the decision process go and why. Like, there's no explicit algorithm that you can defend or in the court of the law. Then now we are faced with this dilemma. Are we going to go in that direction and let the machines just drive our lives and run our lives and decide who can do what, and who can survive, who cannot survive? It's becoming a bit of a sticking point. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, not directly. Not directly. It's true that ethics and morale is becoming an increasingly important topics for developers. There's no, I don't think currently it's not yet part of the developer curriculum, but it might be something we need to look into in the future.
Now, both you and I are kind of practitioners of extreme programming. And one reason I switched to extreme programming back in my career, the thing I liked was XP was proposing to upfront to give options. And boil down, there's option to wait, to defer a decision, option to switch, and option to abandon. And these options come with certain stipulations, whereby if you hire me to work on your project, and I have an extreme programming team, we vouch that at any point in time, you can say, look, I decided I'm going to abandon this. Okay, we're saying that's cool, no problem. But also, we should be able to walk away from that project with leaving you with a functional however far we gotten at that point. So it's not busted. It's not like, okay, well, you spend so much money and now it's sitting there in the graveyard. So that's the ethics of XP that I like, that we are really indeed offering value to the customer, value to wait, to say, look, I'll think about it, value to switch, to say, okay, I like what you did so far, but I want to switch over in different direction, and you are able to accommodate, as well as I want to stop paying you, I don't have any more money, but you walk away, but I have something that's running and functioning. Yeah, maybe it's not fully fledged, but it's not a busted system. And so in that spirit, I think we should continue and saying, what are the options when we implement this machine learning, big data, and are we painting the business in a corner? Are we giving them a reasonable set of options so that at any point in time, they still own the whole thing and they can pretty much guarantee that nothing will get harmful? I don't know if you would agree on that or
not. So I don't think I'm an expert enough in machine learning to really have something an important or a good enough opinion on this. One thing I remember is that I read a paper from a girl doing some research on machine learning, and her paper was about enforcing some companies or organizations to create some interpretable algorithms. So what she was saying is that the problem with neural network learning is that you don't know what's inside, and basically it just happens and that's it, and it gives you a decision or a recommendation, but that's it. And what she was saying is that she's never seen a situation where you can't find an interpretable model that is as good as the non-interpretable one, but that you could use the non-interpretable one to kind of prototype something to see if is there something learnable here to try this. And once you've passed this phase is to have an interpretable model. And her idea is that at some point there might need to be some legislation over that to enforce some interpretability in algorithms for some situations that where we don't want to be completely blind about what's happening.
Yeah, and I read somewhere, and I'm sorry I cannot quote the sources, it's been a while, that EU, European Union, is moving to push some legislation to prevent companies from hiding behind big data. And if something goes wrong, the company says, well, it's not our decision, nor is it our policy, just that these machines decided on their own. This is a slippery slope, right? And you're right. If we could have, because we are used to, like, if you're talking about a traditional company that has some automation and something went wrong, then probably in the court of the law, you will have subject matter experts come and examine the source code and look at the algorithm and that declarative or whatever procedural, and you can then find, okay, here's the bug, or here is where your decision is wrong, therefore you're liable. Or they can say, no, everything looks very good, so there was accidental glitch, and you're off the hook, right? Both options are possible. But like you say, in the machine learning, where the system is opaque and you cannot really, it's not transparent, you cannot really understand how this came to be, it would really help if we could now reverse engineer and maybe produce a legible algorithm. And they could say, okay, I see how your decision process goes. Because every business is running on these business policy rules, and they should be declared, and also they should be vetted, so that if you go, court of the law, you can say, okay, well, why did you decide to, decline this request, right? There's got to be a valid reason. If the machines are deciding, we are kind of screwed because we don't know why. We just think, well, look, this was a big data. We did months and months of intensive training, and now we feel like these machines are pretty reliable. But guess what? Every now and then something goes wrong.
Yeah.
So that's like a bleak, dystopian vision of the future where machines take over. So we can solve it today, of course. But putting that on the side, on the positive side of things, you're seeing a lot of companies actually thrive on that big data model.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that so a lot more companies are using data to drive their business, to know what kind of how to take data-driven decisions about the product, about how to manage teams. For example, this famous Aristotle research paper from Google, this kind of things. So this is very, very nice. But as I said, it's difficult to copy. If you just copy the data, you might get to a kind of really centralized data decision making, but you're not really making your organization more agile, or even giving more, empowering people more. So that's a risk. And another thing I would link to that is the remote movement, the movement to more remote work, which I think is an opportunity. It can be leveraged or not, because it works. Remote works well when you've got a good management in place, where people have autonomy, where they're able to take informed decisions where they have access to the data they need and all. And so, and we see currently a lot of companies are starting to offer remote flexibility, so that's great. So again, I think it's a chance for people who know a bit about Scrum, XP, and the agile principles, because we can nudge the organizations or the teams where we are to try to use these principles to make this remote work actually work. And I think if we don't provide an alternative or this alternative, the environment, the organization will revert to its typical way of doing things. So if it's already micromanaging, it's going to be more micromanaging. So that's so honestly, currently, I think there's a lot of things are moving. I don't know where it's going to head. What I know is that it's always possible for us to nudge the situation around us. So that's something I've learned, something I kind of love to do. So that's a full topic in itself.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it could go both ways. Just quickly going back to your previous discussion on using the data to drive the business, which I think it's a good way to do it. And what we are discovering now slowly, I mean, I'm talking about big organizations that are traditional, is that rather than having a big upfront plan, right, and you chart it in very many details, and you're like, okay, this is 3 or 5 years, and we're just going to execute on that. I think companies are now learning to be more hypothesis driven. Instead of saying, I know exactly what I want, we are seeing people realizing, maybe I don't really know exactly, especially, back in 2020, when all the plans tanked because of the sudden pandemic. And people are like, you can't. We live in the so-called VUCA world, which is like volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. More and more people are realizing, this is how things are. And you cannot really bet your future on saying, I know exactly, nobody has the crystal ball, I know exactly where it's going. So now I'm seeing more and more people opening up to the possibility, hey, let's maybe just treat this as a hypothesis, which means maybe it will work, maybe it won't. And now, this is, if you're doing it in a traditional way, this is an expensive way, because traditionally you have 6, 8, 12, 18 months of just go away and do work and come back and let's see the results. if we were, each hypothesis takes 18 months, So that's why the push for Agile and DevOps and XP, and kind of like in short bursts, like, okay, give you a couple of days, here's a hypothesis, let's, throw it, see if it sticks or not. If it doesn't, let's pivot. If it does, let's go in that direction, whatnot. So to me, I'm seeing a lot of these hypotheses starting to emerge, and we are like, okay, this is a hypothesis, but I'm not seeing still solid, what I call validated learning. So if you and I come up with a hypothesis and we have a team and they go and do it, then what have we learned from that implementation? It's still very vague. And I believe data-driven is better for validated learning, right? If you act on it and, it's okay, you have a hypothesis, you decided to do it, you act on it. Now you need some intelligent learning to happen, to tell you, oh, I see, this is not good. Let's abort mission, or, oh, wow, this is promising. And then you keep iterating like that. So in that regard, I'm very enthused about data-driven as a feedback, right? As something to inform your decision. And I think that holds a lot of promise. If indeed companies are going to switch from the arrogant, I know it all, I know exactly what I want, to we don't really know, let's hypothesize, let's do more scientific approach. And I think also to your other point, the remote model, and we are going through that future of work, we call it future of work, is also a hypothesis, and we don't know how that's going to work.
No.
And yeah, it could go into serious surveillance. There's some businesses that demand employees keep their camera on all day long.
Yeah.
And you can't even take a bathroom break. It's like to that level, because the technologies now are giving you really a fine-grained, high-resolution view into your staff. On the other end of the spectrum is like complete anarchy, where nobody knows what anybody's doing. They're just like sitting at home. Are you working? So we need to find a happy medium.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, on the data-driven side, there's another aspect. Is, for example, at the company I'm working at currently, we're a team of coaches, and we're trying to spread some new, habits throughout the organization, and it's a bit like innovation diffusion. And so we're doing we're experimenting all the time. We're trying things. Some work, some don't. And the trick is that at the early stage of a product, sometimes you don't have enough people you're interacting with, or that are aware of you, so that you can really be data driven. So at these early stage, things are qualitative. So you don't have quantitative. You don't have enough data to be quantitative. Lead data driven. So you can have a few points and know, oh, this is mostly working or mostly not working, but you can't be fully data driven in the scientific way that you might get to further down the road. So that's something I learned as well.
Yeah, so again, I think this is part of the, could be, because companies still like this definition of done. And right now the definition of done is quite shallow. And it's mostly focused on outputs. Like I'm done with 15 lines of code, I'm done. What is the outcome of that? What is the impact of your 15 lines of code? I think we need to extend our mind into all the way down to the bitter end. Okay, you made a change to the system. All right, anybody can make any change, but what is that change? What is the impact of that change? Have we learned anything? Have we improved anything? That is still kind of a gray area, like you said. We don't know how to measure it, right? And sometimes people say, "Oh yeah, every now and then we have a poll with our customers. How do you like it?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, fine." That's very, vague. That's not specific enough. Certainly not scientific, right?
No.
And so I think what we are struggling with, at least in the large organizations, is this ability to abandon the what is known as the finality premise, that you have they call it city on a hill, like your perfect system, and anything less than that is like, no, don't even talk to me unless you go there. That's a bit counterproductive. And secondly, still people like to hoard resources, and people tend to gravitate towards large batches and making significant. So people, like what I'm noticing, for example, is when coaching XP teams, and even teams who have been given agency, autonomy, go forth and prosper. So now you control your destiny. There's a tendency for us to overbid. Even though we're like, look, let's go with small batches, let's go modest. But something in the engineering, when we look at I always bite off more than I can chew. And I think that is a very important discipline to learn, to not overbid, because it only hurts you. It never, you're trying to impress somebody, but it's always the opposite. You disappoint someone, right?
Yeah.
I found that to be a really tough challenge for us. Hold back and say, you know what, I'm going to take a smaller chunk, because everybody's like, yeah, I can, yeah, give me that as well. Yeah, I can take it, because now you feel important, you feel like you're contributing, and that is, I think, the challenge that probably you, when you're doing XP coaching, you're seeing that and you're trying to control that, right?
Yes.
That's the nature of, I don't know why we're so. Is it just in software or in other areas? I'm not sure, but we like heroics, right?
Yeah, I think it's I would say it comes from human nature. We've got biases, optimistic biases, so we think we can do more than we can actually do. That's one thing for sure. I think people mostly want to please others, so they want to really try the best to please them. The really most fundamental, there's other things at play. I think another fundamental data-driven way of working is just to stick to yesterday's weather. I mean, if during last sprint you managed to deliver that much, and you did so for the 3 previous sprints, don't expect that this time you'll be able to deliver twice as that. And another thing is that actually we've got a number of decisions we're able to make during a day. It kind of finite. It depends on our energy level, and it means that if we're to argue about what we should be doing or not, we might be better off doing this in the morning than in the late afternoon. It might be just energy saving, coming back to system 1 and system 2 thinking fast and slow, it's just too difficult to argue and to really go into thinking about what should I choose, what should we not do. And actually, I read a book lately called The 4,000 Weeks that talks about the human life length is about 4,000 weeks on average. And every time we can't do everything in 4,000 weeks. It's impossible. It's actually very short, 4,000 weeks. So we need to choose things. And every time you choose something, you make a sacrifice. And so it's difficult to choose something. And so it's a fundamental human bias, I think. So we need to, and again, I think we're coming back to this moral and ethical aspect of software, is that our job is not only to write code and write clean code, maybe fast code or whatever kind of code you need to write at that moment, but also to be an actualized human able to interact correctly with the people around and be assertive in some way, know yourself, know your limits, and be able to express these correctly, taking the others into account. All these human aspects of things are very important.
Absolutely. Now, in my view, and probably wrong, but that's how I see things, we had some interesting breakthroughs about 20 years ago with XP and TDD and Agile. And since then, we haven't had any, in my view, interesting breakthroughs except one. And that one, to me, is very significant. It's called mob programming, which is new, relatively speaking. And I haven't been able to find any evidence of mob programming prior to going back in the past. Usually when you hear something new, you go back and you read computing history. Oh, they did it in the 60s, right? They just kind of repackage and rename it. But mob programming seems to be new. And to me, it's very significant breakthrough, and it changes everything. I know you've been involved in mob programming and whatnot. And it kind of touches upon what you mentioned here, with somehow the atmosphere and the climate changes when we are doing this as ensemble or mob programming. Because most of us, myself including, we started our career and we spent a lot of time working in a corner solo.
Mm-hmm.
You have your individual feature branch or whatever, and you're making changes locally. And sometimes in the old days, we spent days, weeks without ever interacting with anyone. We're just kind of coding and messing around and blah, 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 right? And first time I experienced mob programming was a mind-blowing situation. I just couldn't, if somebody describes it, you're like, oh, this is the stupidest thing ever. But when you actually experience it, like, oh, wow, there's something to it, right? And maybe, like you said, that helps alleviate some of these concerns with like, okay, what do I choose? If you're on your own, it's always this struggle. But when you're especially if it's a fully functional mob, it really is interesting.
Yes.
So do you have any experiences from that area that you can share?
Yeah, what I can share is that it actually fixes, by design, it fixes a lot of problems, sorry. But first one is that if all the team is working in one mob, as one mob, it's only working on one topic at a time anyway. So there's less, the problem of spreading too thin on too many problems at the same time goes away, because the team is just working on one thing. And if the team doesn't block anymore, and the business represented in the team will not be far away, ideally would be in the mob. Maybe he's just sitting next to the mob if he can't all the time, but ideally he would be in the mob. So he's collaborating with the team on a more intense level, which makes it which removes a lot of the prioritization and kind of pressure problems. Another thing I see in the mob is that we've actually at work to improve mob programming. We've been trying code retreats over mob programming. So for example, if a team is trying mob and doesn't really manage very well, we'll suggest them to do a full day of code retreat around mob programming. So we will ask them, come up with variations of mob programming that you would like to experiment, and let's experiment this for a day. So in one day they'll have 4 rounds maybe of mob programming, using different styles, different variations, different working agreements. And at the end of the day, we'll say, oh, we preferred this one, and maybe we could pick this from that one and this from that one, and that would be our ideal. And in the end, they worked on how are we going to work together, and they came to an agreement. And this helps all the communication aspect of things. And lastly, we've seen that in these, we often end up with kind of mob by default has some roles. So there's the driver, there's the navigators, and sometimes you've got some flavors with one navigator and some observers that it all depends on the team who wants to organize as they want. But you could have other roles, like you could have a scribe, someone taking notes of what's happening. You could have a timekeeper. You could have I don't know, someone who's focused on security issues. So, and all performance issues, all these, they help to remove the multitask, the internal task switching that is happening inside every programmer's head, because every programmer is constantly task switching between, oh, I need to compile this line of code, so I need to declare a function. I need to make sure I use the correct wordings. Or what is this domain concept I need to put in there? So how do you compute this? So all this is happening in his head all the time. And whereas when you're mobbing, you can split this between the different people in the mob, which makes, in the end, it makes the whole thing easier for the mind of everyone. So one result is that people are able to produce more quality thoughts. And the other one is that maybe as well, they've got more energy left for the decisions to make. For if ever they need to focus on something, they've got more energy to say, oh no, actually, we're going to focus on that. We're not going to start doing this. And finally, I would say just a pure side effect is that people will think twice before interrupting a mob to jump to their new priority.
Yeah, that's very nicely described, and you're right. Yanking, context switching in our profession is fairly damaging, harmful. And like I say, if I'm working in isolation on my own, the boss is not going to hesitate, call me up and say, okay, now I want you to look into this, and back and forth, and my productivity goes down the drain. But if you have your mob over there, you don't feel comfortable just barging in and saying, okay, drop everything. And so it gives that cocoon, that shield where you can indeed be more productive. So that's a really good observation. I thought about it a couple of times, but never heard anyone mention it until now. And it's a good observation. It is true. It is true that they just leave them alone. Okay. It's interesting. Yeah. Keyboardless programming is something that some people recoil in shock when they encounter it the first time. And I was hosting mob programming sessions. I was facilitating, right? And sometimes we have visitors. People spend, first time ever, they're sitting on the sidelines, and then at the end, people come to me and say, "You know what? This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life." Real programmers. This is I can't believe what I'm seeing. This is so stupid, right? But I think that because they haven't participated and they really haven't tested the waters. It's like sitting at the edge of the swimming pool and watching people jump and having fun. Like, no, this is for kids. This is not for real men.
Yeah.
So that's another. Yeah, you have to. One of those things where you have to try it. You cannot read about it and clue in. You have to get the skin in the game and try it. It's a brilliant thing, and I strongly believe in that, and I'm pushing for it, right?
Yeah.
And, but another thing, I mean, it's kind of similar, but not really. I'm a big proponent of test-driven development, and for the exact reason you described here is when I'm doing test-driven development, I cleanly separate my thinking about the desired behavior from my thinking about the desired code structure. If I'm not doing it, then these are combined at the same time. And if I'm just strictly writing code, my head is split because I'm like, okay, at the same time, I'm thinking about what behavior I'm expecting and also how do I structure the code to deliver that behavior. And that is substandard. That is like lousy. At the end of the day, what I deliver is lousy, as opposed to me doing TDD with test first, much better. And I go back, I'm proud of that code, but I go back to when I'm not doing TDD, I'm ashamed a little bit. I'm like, oh, I hope nobody sees this because it's a mess, right? So there's really a good point, something to say about separating concerns.
Yes. And not only, sorry.
And you also describe much better in a mob, there's more concerns that are separate, not just the structure, but aspects such as security, performance, domain, you name it. If we're working as a whole team, hey, everybody's here and they can shoulder the load, and all of a sudden we feel relaxed.
Yes. Yeah, and I think I made the similar observation for TDD is that with good enough tests, you can kind of forget about the future because you know that you're going to be able to refactor your code because you've got tests to back you up. You can almost forget the past because you're not creating many bugs when you're using TDD, which means that you can really concentrate on what you're doing on your current task. And this removes a lot of the mental load you might have in your head, and which again makes you puts you in the best conditions to produce your best work and to do something great in the end.
Yeah, and it's like oftentimes the analogy being used is the juggler. Anybody can learn to juggle 3 balls, and then maybe if you're advanced, you go 5 balls, but only professionals can do maybe 7 balls. But going beyond that, nobody in the world can juggle like 50 balls.
No.
So it quickly gets to the point where it's unmanageable. And it really helps if you reduce the complexity. Like you say, focus on one thing, you do it well, and that's where TDD comes in. Another thing I wanted to ask you, what I'm seeing a lot is there's a lopsided situation where we, as an organization, tend to value desired behavior much more than the desired code structure. And I'm seeing a lot of the times the emphasis is placed on functionality. And I'm challenged a lot trying to promote technical excellence. Because while everybody nods and agrees, yes, technical excellence is important, they always say, okay, we'll do it later. We don't have time for that now. And that to me is a death march. And I'm really struggling to find a way to say both are equally important.
Yeah.
Yes, it is true that the end user never sees the code structure, And sometimes people say, well, who cares? They will never see the code structure. Why does it have to be well crafted? And you just see functionality. So we should spend 99% of our time on functionality. Maybe if there's 1% left, we go back and try and refactor. Some people are against refactoring, right? But to me, this is a false economy. And I don't know if you have any words of advice or some.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's something I've been looking into lately as well. So yeah, my first advice is to but I think that's what you're doing already, is to teach teams how to use TDD to write just the minimum code, but write it well. So I think that's the first step. But then we also always inherit a ton of old code that is not always in very good shape. And so lately I've stumbled upon a few articles, and which all seem to point to the same direction, is that the tip of the iceberg of the bad structure of code or the messy code is bugs. So the number of bugs you actually end up with is a kind of a proxy measure to the state of the code. And so what I see, the latest interesting things I've read about this is that use this number of bugs you have, try to see where they're linked to, and then agree on with the business of how to deal with these bugs. So you might need to fix some right away, others might wait a bit, and others you'll just park them. And at some point, when you've parked enough, you could say, see, all these things, we couldn't work on them. And it means that this thing is buggy, it's going to bring some more bugs, delay some other features, and then you can start to think, so what is a small improvement we could do to this code structure that would alleviate this problem a bit? So it's trying to, and I've seen this, actually it looks like from what I've seen that managing technical debt is similar to trying to reach a zero bug policy. It's a journey. You can't get there tomorrow. Maybe you'll get there in 3 years, in 5 years. It might be very long. At the end of the journey, you're in a kind of zero bug state where you've got very few bugs and you know how to deal with them as soon as they appear. And all the time you were spending fixing bugs, you're now spending adding features. And this bug thing might be the key that links business, that aligns business people and developers towards internal quality.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good advice. I think it makes sense to track bugs and make it commensurable with the state of the code quality. But you see, part of the problem, I think, is that maybe people who are running the project or making decisions are not necessarily aware of where activities are going, or not even aware of types of activities. For example, oftentimes you hear people say, look, I would really like to do TDD, but the supervisor, whatever, who's making the decision is saying we don't have time for that, right? And it could go both ways, right? But my answer to that is always, are they okay with you spending days debugging? We have time for that, right? So if the supervisor has no problem with staff spending time debugging, they should not have any problems staff spending time writing tests. Because to me, debugging is TDDs in reverse. Basically, you're taking many more small steps, examining values. You're just doing it after the fact, right? But if you flip the tables, TDD is the same thing. You're doing a small step with some values before the fact. And but the outcome is much more desirable because you preclude any debugging, because there's no debugging when you're doing TDD. Plus, now you have all your debugging sessions recorded. You can replay them to your heart's content. But if you're spending time debugging, these sessions are not recorded and you can not replay them next time when there is a bug again. So, you know, these things I'm hoping help, but sometimes I'm also finding that people use it as an excuse. So they go and ask the manager, can I do TDD? Why do you have to ask? Or can I do refactoring? It's like saying, can I use the if statement here? Can I use polymorphism? They don't care, right? They shouldn't be concerned with that level of detail, but yet people often ask that. And if you ask, you say, always get no, right?
Mm.
And then it's a good excuse later on, say, look, we would have delivered good quality code, but they said no, so we are blameless. So divert to blame. So that's a big challenge. And again, still technical excellence takes the back seat. And also we're not keeping track of what are the consequences of technical excellence. That by abandoning it here, you pay dearly down the road with all these defects and house on fire and all these things are falling apart.
Yeah.
Nobody connects the dots, right? And this is another challenge in our profession to make it explicit and visible. Look, because we decided to cut corners back then, remember? Today, we are all like all hands on deck, spending days trying to fix terrible mistakes, disasters. And also, when kind of switching maybe the topic, going back to mob programming and all that, I recently discovered, you know, Alistair Coburn, he's a pretty good thought leader. He introduced me to this concept of a guest leader. I don't know if you ever.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'm not an expert in it, but I've heard of it. I'm
really warming up to it. I think there is something of value there. And I think the classical example would be if a company organizes a picnic to celebrate employees, and in a traditional company, you have managers giving hamburgers to employees, compared to a potluck where everybody brings something and they share, and then the vertical distance is almost not there, right? So everybody's and then people step forward, become leaders for a while, and then step back, and somebody else. It's all spontaneous, and I think that arrangement is much more productive and creates a better work ethics. Have you had any experiences with that?
Yeah, from what I hear from you, I guess that any team that reaches a certain level of self-organization will tend towards that, because some people will assume some leadership on some topics at some moment, and might then after that, you know, leave the place, or and hopefully different people will assume different roles on leading roles, sorry, at different moments for different topics. So yeah, I'd say this is very close to my experience in self-organized teams. Yes.
Yeah, I think it holds a lot of promise. And another example is if you're invited to a formal dinner and you're sitting around the table and you notice that some people have their glasses empty, you will not get up and fill their glasses, because it will be offensive. This is in a hierarchical, formalized situation. Therefore, the evening is not going as smooth as you would expect.
Yeah.
But if it's again, a shared potluck among friends where everybody brought something, then you would have no problem getting up and walking over there and pouring someone a glass of wine. And that way the evening is going really smooth. And everybody feels good. And I think we should try and cultivate that. And one of the things is, in the presence of the appointed leader or anointed leader, people tend to be a bit reserved. And I think it's the onus on the official leader to lower their standard in everything, in body posture, in voice, in the tone of the voice, and what they talk. It's mostly like you retreat as if you happen to be the official leader, and that way you encourage others to just step forward. Something needs to be done, step in, do it. You don't have to hog the spotlight, but I think that is a good promise for, especially in we're mobbing and doing collaboration, right? But one thing in my opinion, the most effective, okay, two things that are really effective in mobbing. One is TDD, because I'm noticing if we are mobbing with TDD, the people are placing their bets. Like you make a diff, are the tests gonna pass or not? That gels the situation. But even stronger than that, I don't know if you've ever done that, is mutation testing. So when we're mobbing and okay, all tests pass, everything is green. Okay, applause. Okay, cool. Let's run mutation testing now. What do you guys think? Are any mutants going to survive? And people like, yeah, no, any mutant's going to get killed. And that, and then you run mutation testing and you see, okay, 2 mutants survived. Oh my God, that galvanizes the crowd. Everybody's like, oh, we got to kill those mutants, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a really great, strong energy in the room or in the virtual room, whatever we're doing. And people turn into a pack of wolves going after the prey. Like, okay, I'm not leaving this session until we kill those, whatever, 5 mutants that's surviving. How dare they survive, right? And then people go like, I gotta kill it. This creates phenomenal energy and cohesion. And
yeah, that's a good
I've had
point.
situations when at the end of the session we killed all the mutants and people feel like we're all buddies. We're all like, it cements the team. We're a team, right? We know what we're doing. We are successful.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal feeling that I haven't experienced anywhere else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because it's very objective. It's not like subjectively say, yeah, we did well. This is a nice play, blah blah blah. No, it's very objectively measurable. We had some surviving mutants. We managed to kill them. We're happy.
Yeah, it creates kind of a common opponent. So yeah. That's yeah. So something we've been playing with on our side is TCR. I don't know if you've heard of TCR, test commit or revert.
Oh yeah, I hosted in July the first International TDD Conference. I organized and hosted it, and my closing keynote was hands-on TCR. I presented TCR with mutation testing, and I showed people how I use TCR. Now I'm exclusively using TCR. I'm not doing TDD anymore, and the reason I'm doing it is I switched from like my previous what's the word model or method or bon mot was I like to start from a broken system. I like to see the system broken, and then it gives me confidence that I'm not having false positives. Like the system seems to be working, but is it really working? So TDD was, to me, a really good situation where I always break the system and then I fix it. I break it, fix it, and that's how I go. With TCR, I changed my philosophy. I like self-healing systems. I like my system, if I break it, to automatically self-heal. I don't have to do it. And that's why I love TCR. It really forces me to make microscopic steps, like tiny little steps. Break something, okay, it's back to normal, no problem. Going that way is much. So now, if I because I teach TDD dojo, if I go back and do TDD, it feels so pedestrian compared to TCR. So yeah, I love TCR.
Yeah. And we're actually using it in the dojo, yeah, because we found that it acts like a bit like an extra coach for if people start taking too big steps, it gets reverted, and so they learn that they need to take small steps, and it's even easier to sell, surprisingly, because it's fun, and we can tell them, oh, but sometimes you've got teams that say, oh, but I don't want to apply TDD because I can't, because this and that. And so it's very difficult to make them really try their best in the training or in the dojo. Whereas if you're doing it with TCR, it's easy to just say, oh, it's just an exercise to learn and practice. And it feels so alien to them that usually they go with it. And by trying it, they learn a lot about writing small steps and splitting their work in small steps, which is a skill that is applicable whatever the context, whether you've got tests on art, legacy, greenfield, whatever, it's always applicable. and it's always useful. So that's yeah, it's a nice new thing, TCR.
Yeah,
I
it is.
love it.
It is. And it's, the philosophy that if somebody asked me, what's your philosophy in software development, I would use Ron Jeffries' sentence. He says, the trick is never to let code not be working. So TCR is bringing me close to that situation where the code is always working. And I'm not spending, I'm spending like couple of minutes and even less making diffs. While I'm making diffs, things are in limbo. I don't know if, I have no idea what the diff is going to do. But with TCR, uh, it executes and it's working. It's working either by now it has more capabilities, a little bit more, or it's working like now it's back to normal state, the way it used to work. Fine, everything's cool. So that's the challenge in software development is lousy feedback loops, very long feedback loops. Like in the old days, we waited for days to see if a code is working. No, it's just ridiculous. Now we're crunching down to seconds. That to me, that's the progress. That's the goal. But also, you're probably following Kent Beck, and I'm very enthused about his idea that every keystroke should be in production. The moment I think that's the future. It has to be. We should not have those like gated phases and speed bumps but working as a mob and if you make it's in production. That to me is the real feedback.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We played a game. We animated a workshop at work about a game called the Extreme Carbide Show. So it's a variant. It's built on the Elephant Carpaccio by Alistair Cockburn, and but it's a game in the sense that there's a server sending orders, and the different teams compete against each other. And whenever they manage to answer to, they're coding a client that is answering these orders, and whenever they manage to answer correctly, they get some points. Well, it's money in the game. And whenever they answer a bad answer, they'll lose some money. And if they just say, oh, I don't know how to deal with that, they won't get anything. But it's very nice because as soon as people start to see that, oh, actually, whenever I'm delivering something, I get some feedback in the logs and I see what's happening, they start to use this a lot, and it really makes them understand, oh, actually, I should use this. And it puts this for all from keystroke to delivery loop very fast, and people start to really use this, and so it's a fun way to experience that.
Yeah,
a fun way to experience that.
So you just an idea popped in my head as you were describing this. I'm now working on organizing the second TDD conference because the first one was quite successful and people were really interested. And wanted to ask you, would you be interested maybe in presenting something like that on the conference or whatever else TDD related you?
Yeah, definitely.
That would be great. Because this time I'm hoping, this time around, because okay, the first conference we had like, Jupao Hill and James Granning and, people from the original, and then we had some young contributors, but it's mostly, presentation about TDD. The second conference I would prefer to have more hands-on, like just, live coding and, with a little bit of whatever you want to talk about, but less slides, because slides kind of fly by and everybody's like, yeah, sure, and then it doesn't stick. But when you're looking and watching people coding, and if you watch my talk, I was coding, sweating, and making mistakes. Somehow, I think it pulls people more in, and it has a longer effect, right? So I would really appreciate if you can consider think about organizing that session.
Yeah.
And also, I was thinking, hopefully next year the pandemic will wind down. I'm not sure. We talked last year. This time we were talking about. I was talking maybe because in July it was all virtual. It was all like remote, but we had people from all over the world, right? But this time I was talking virtual, both virtual and in the physical location, and I was really eyeing Paris So I don't know if you have facility, if you know if you have facilities where we can book and maybe organize.
Yeah, it's an actually, I've been thinking myself of a hybrid, but there are many facilities you could book in Paris, but I'm wondering if you could envision a kind of a hybrid mode where you've got hubs, and maybe we could, that could be an option, and have companies just sponsor, and offer a few
Awesome.
seats.
If you're going back, check the last conference, most people were from Europe. That's why I thought moving it to Paris, because it's a central hub, right? There are some people from Asia, some from North America, but most of the young forces, interestingly, are European. And probably because Europe has still a very good education system, people are, following these like higher intellectual topics. Will be nice, and hopefully, I don't know what the situation. Probably, are you winding down with the pandemic? What's the situation in France now?
Oh, it's improving a lot. It's improving a lot. Yeah, the vaccination rate is quite high in the country, and we're keeping fingers crossed. But we hope to have a smooth winter. We'll see. We'll see.
But it would be great. It would be just dream come true to have a nice little international conference. Kind of center, because people will be flying from South America, North America, Asia, coming to Europe.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Let's maybe continue, stay in touch, and see.
Yes.
Because
definitely.
My original goal was twofold. One is to because I was teaching software engineering and development in my previous career, and anytime I proposed TDD as a curriculum, they'll push back. Like, no. I'm like, why? Do you see any job openings? Because they're always catering to, what people want to learn to get a job. And secondly, I would like to see TDD become more of a standard thing when you're hiring software engineers. That goes without saying that you should be proficient in TDD. And sadly, we're not there yet, even like 25 years later. We want to raise the awareness. We want that to become the norm.
Yeah.
We do. If you go back and watch, we do have some phenomenal already experts, people who really kicking ass on TDD, and we can learn a lot from any of these people, right? But I'm also interested in younger forces upcoming, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where the strengths and the juices are coming from.
Yeah. And I for me, TDD is really, it's a way to make developers happier.
Of course.
Or at least to be able to be happy. You can't force them to be happy, but you can at least give them the safety of mind, the safety of work, to let them be.
It's true, and then when they're happier, then you see everybody else is happier, because there's less problems, and it also builds trust in the long run, right?
Yeah.
And once we build trust, that's priceless. That's like where we want to be, right? Trusty partner to the business that enables them and all that, right? Okay, Philippe, we already spent an hour talking. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
And let's stay in touch about the conference.
Yeah, definitely.
And hopefully we'll see each other in person next year.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bonsoir.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.